Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Today's day 2 on our knife making project. So on day 1, we basically explained the metals, designed, cut out the shape, put our bevels in, and then today we took a look. We drilled out our holes prior, and we're going to be getting ready for heat treating today. So this is when the knife actually takes its form and becomes a knife instead of a wall hanger. Alright, so one of the other things you're going to want to do before heat treat is drill your holes. It is next to impossible to drill your holes afterwards. So what I'm going to be using for my pins is stainless steel tube. The other thing you want to keep in mind is you want to make sure that your holes are the exact size. So I use a vernier caliper, I check my tube or pin, whatever you want to use, check the drill bit. There's nothing worse than getting done and realizing that your hole is too big or too small and your pins don't fit properly. So that's very important. I also said you can do this with next to no tools. You're going to need a drill or a drill press. If you don't have one, borrow one from a neighbor, and if you can't do that, a 308 will work. Another thing is if your pin is just a little bit too big, you can cut off a chunk about that big, put it in a drill press, and then take sandpaper to the edge, and then just continue to keep checking it with your vernier caliper until it's the right size. And that's it for the pins. Alright, so I'm going to change a couple things on this. I'm not really happy with the design on this. I don't like the square back. I'm not really a fan of the tip either. So I'm going to cut it on this line. I drew a few different things, but this is the one I'm happy with. So I'm going to chop that down on the bandsaw real quick and just sand out my edges. Just make it look a little prettier. Okay, so I just cut off a couple of pieces that I wasn't happy with on the bandsaw. Now I'm just going to use the round part of the belt sander just to profile and reshape it, and then add the edge back onto it because I cut it off, and then we'll be able to move on to the heat treating process. Okay, just before we move on, I wanted to explain what I was doing in that one part. When I put the bevels in the first place, I was using a really rough grit of belt, and it leaves little lines on the edge of the bevel. And you want to get those lines out prior to heat treat because they're impossible to get out afterwards. So that's exactly what I was doing with my little orbital sander there, is just trying to get it ready for the heat treat process. You want it to be pretty much a finished product before you do your heat treat. All right, if you guys want a reference as to what I'm talking about, you can go back and take a look at my first video, which I've recently just uploaded onto YouTube under JL Pladsmith, and everything I'm talking about is on there. Alright, so in order to go into heat treating, we're going to have to go into a few more details and explain what a couple things mean. The first thing we're going to have to explain is thermal cycling. So thermal cycling is when you heat the temperature up to exact temperatures and then let it cool in air. You have to repeat this process several times at different temperatures. The purpose of that, if I can show you over to the whiteboard here. So when you get your steel, it looks like this. You got all different sizes and molecules of steel in just random areas all over the place. So what we're actually doing is we're taking the larger molecules, breaking them down into smaller molecules and rearranging them to be in their tightest pattern, such as this. So this is the process that we have to go through. So our very first cycle is going to be at 1600 degrees. So we heat it up to 1600 degrees and then we let it cool in still air to the point where you can touch it with your bare hands. The easiest way to tell when you've reached 1600 degrees is the metal that we're using loses magnetism at 1420 degrees. So we'll keep checking the metal with a magnet over and over. Once it loses magnetism, you're going to have to go by the color and your own eye. I can't really show you on camera, but you're going to have to go by color a couple shades brighter to reach your 1600 degrees. Then after that, then we can put it back in the forge, go to 1550 degrees for cycle 2. Then cycle 3 is 1450 degrees, so just after it loses magnetism. And then the fourth cycle, is at 1200 degrees. So it'll still be magnetic at that point. I highly recommend you check it with a temperature gun. Mike, can you grab the temperature gun for me?
This?
Thank you. All right, so this is a temperature gun. You can get this at Canadian Tire. They go on sale. You can generally pick them up when they're on sale for about 12 to 15 bucks. This will go up to, I believe, 1250 degrees. So it's just the right temperature to check the fourth one. Because without the temperature gun, the fourth one is actually the hardest one to figure out if you've reached the temperature or not. Okay. Once again, cool to touch. Then we go for our fifth and final cycle, which is where we actually do our quench. So we're going to heat it up to 1475 degrees and dip it in canola oil for 15 seconds. The canola oil actually has to be heated up to 130 degrees. That's because, believe it or not, when it's 130 degrees, it's more liquidy and it'll actually cool the metal faster than if you were using cold oil. Another thing was when you pull your metal out of the quench, it should not be smoking anymore. If you're still seeing smoke, just dip it back in there, keep bobbing it up and down. And the other thing is when you're actually doing your quench, you want to keep your knife moving in a slicing motion. That's to prevent air pockets from building up. We're going to explain all of this as we do it, so we'll go along and we'll explain everything to you as we go. All right, boys and girls, we're going to get into the fun part now where you actually get to harden your blade and turn it into a functional piece. So a little introductory to what we got going on here. This is my forge. It's a through and through. I got it capped at the back because the blade we're working on doesn't need to go all that far. Propane tank, the basics. So what I have in front of me are all essential things if you're going to be doing this indoors. Like I said, you can get away with doing this in a bonfire if you have to, or you can use a charcoal forge. If you're working on something very, very small, you can use MAP gas torches. Like I said, very small projects. So here's some of the things you're going to need. If you're working indoors, carbon monoxide detector. That is important. Also well ventilated. My door is wide open right now. You need the fresh air because otherwise you'll start slurring your words and you'll just pass out. Not good. This is what I use to grab my metal out of the forge, lock it. You never ever grab the blade with this because these teeth will leave marks. So only handle the handle with it. If you have to handle the blade, use a pair of tongs of any kind. I just happen to have forged my own. We're going to need a magnet. You will be checking it often to see whether it loses magnetism or not. Temperature gun, as I explained earlier, we're going to be using that for thermocycling stage number 4, and some gloves. These are just welding gloves. They're insulated. You still don't want to grab metal with it while it's glowing or anything. And a fire extinguisher. Flare-ups do happen sometimes when you go to quench. You can actually have a big fireball come off of your oil. Keep that in mind. Don't have your face right above it as you quench. And you're going to need something to quench in. This is what I'm using, and I'm using a little butane stove to heat up my oil to 130 degrees. If you don't have one of these stoves, take a spare piece of metal, throw it in the forge, get it hot, and just stir it with your glowing metal and keep checking it with your temperature gun. Make sure it gets up to 130 degrees for your final quench part. Yeah, so that's basically everything you're going to need right here to get moving on your knife. Okay, another thing I wanted to explain, I kind of forgot to say this. You want to heat up the handle before the blade. The blade's the part that really matters, but you want the handle to be about even temperature. That's just to stop it from warping in between all these stages. The other reason that we're heating up the handle first is so that way we don't overheat the tip. You don't want to overheat the tip of the blade, so we generally heat up the handle first. So as you can see, hopefully you can see, I'm starting to get like a rainbow in the color. That's showing you your different temperature lines. Handle's almost ready. So it lost magnetism now, so we're going to go a couple shades brighter. This is something you're just going to have to trial and error. I can't explain to you how color looks. How I see color and how you see color is not going to be the same. And cameras actually change color from what you see in reality as well. Stage 1, 1600 degrees. Now we're going to turn off the forge and let this cool in still air so you can touch it. This is what you call forge scale on the edge here. You're going to want to brush that off because it's harder to remove later on. So this is just a wire brush. Alright, so as you can see, we got it out of the forge. You can touch it now. You're gonna end up with little things like this. It's not a big deal. We'll take all that out later. See this bubble? That's just forge skill. You can pop that. It comes right off, not a big deal. So we're gonna go in for the second stage of our thermal cycling. Handle first, as always. Sure that we get the heat distributed evenly, flipping it both sides, moving it back and forth if we need to. Kill the lights now, Mike. Alright, so this is quench 2. We're going to 1550 degrees. Nice even heat. Or not quench, sorry. Thermocycle number 2. 1550 degrees. Nice even heat. Non-magnetic. I'm gonna kill the gas. Alright, so this is thermal cycle number 3. We're going to 1450 degrees, so just after it loses magnetism. Remember that it loses magnetism at 1420, so very shortly afterwards, just like a slight shade more, and it's ready to take out. Kill it if you want. Makes better footage. Another thing to consider is it does actually help to do this in the dark, so that way you can tell the colors every time that you do it. Because if you're changing your lighting, then you can no longer use what you remember the colors being as a reference, right? Still a little bit magnetic at the tap. Alright, that's it. Thermal cycle stage 3. as you can see, the thicker parts of the metal are going to take a little bit longer to cool down. So if it's catching on camera here, the middle of this is still glowing kind of orange, and you can watch it fade away towards the center. Good. Alright, so this is thermal cycle number 4. We're going to go to 1200 degrees. At this time, you're still going to be magnetic, so I'm going to use a temperature gun to make sure I'm at the right area. Handle first, as always. So that's that. 1200 degrees, final cycle. Yes. Just take off whatever scale you can get. Like I said, it's a lot easier to do this now than it is later. And let it cool to touch. Okay guys, I'm going to explain a couple of things now because I'm not going to have the chance to do it when I'm actually doing my quench. Everything goes really quickly. So when I go to do my quench, I'm going to put it in there, go in a slicing motion for about 15 to 20 seconds. If you pull it up and it's still smoking, then it's not quite ready yet. Just put it back in, keep it in a slicing motion. What we're actually doing is we're trying to drop the temperature of the metal by about 900 degrees in 1 to 2 seconds. Okay? And then from there, after you pull it out, you're going to have a very short period of time until it gets to about 200 degrees. Once it drops below 200 degrees, you will not be able to fix warps. So we're going to go directly over to the vise and put it between 2 pieces of angle iron and clamp it down and let it finish cooling locked like that. That is to stop any warps that could occur. And that's basically what's going to happen here. Alright, so this is the final step in our heating process. We're going to heat it up to 1475 degrees, and then we're going to take it out and go directly to the quench tank and then lock it down in the vise. So I'll put them in now. Handle first. Thing to consider is if you're trying to do this well, maintain the temperature of the oil, it really helps to have somebody helping you with this part, because you can't really be back and forth on both of them. All right, so now that we got a lockdown in the vise, we know that we're taking our warps out right now. So we're gonna allow it to cool down in here until once again where it's cool to the touch. So what we've done actually at this point is harden the metal to its most hardened state that it can possibly be in. But at that point, it's actually fragile. If you were to drop it or bang it really hard, it'll break like glass. So we now have to do another stage where we bring it home, put it in the oven at 375 degrees for 2 hours. And the reason for that is so that way we can actually soften it just a little bit to get it to the sweet spot where it's hard but still not fragile, essentially. Okay, so we finished heat treating our blade. You can really see the martensite now. All I did was take it home, rinse it off in my sink, soap water and a sponge, and you can really tell all the details that come out in the metal. That's proof that it hardened and that we did everything properly. So like I said, it's too hard right now. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take 2 pieces of angle iron, like such, put it in between them, and lock it down with some vise, or C-clamp, sorry. And then we're going to put it in the oven at 375 degrees for 2 hours. And that'll be the final stage of our hardening heat treating process. And don't use bed frame. Do not use bed frame, guys. Bed frame will warp in the oven and you will have issues. You will probably develop a warp that you didn't have before. So use good angle iron. Do not use bed frame. Into the oven. We're working on a couple of them at a time right now, guys. And just set a timer. Alright, so at this point we have completed our heat treat. Everything that we need to do for the heat treating process is completely finished. At this point you have what we can call a fully functional knife. So that's going to end part 2 of our knife making series. Part 3 is we're going to clean all of this up, put an edge on it, and put the handle on, the scales, the pins, and basically complete the knife. That will be our next video. I look forward to seeing you guys there. Have a good one.